Hello and welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow, India's only daily television platform for small businesses. Now, over the course of the last decade, some of the most successful startups that have emerged have been created in the midst of a market downturn. Can we recreate that success in the COVID-19 era? It's a tough topic. It deserves to be addressed from a 360-degree perspective. And to do just that, I'm joined by a very special guest on the show tonight, the co-founder of Oddup, the CEO of Alluva, and project lead at Recerve, James Giancotti. James, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, absolutely happy to be here.
Now, James, for sake of some context setting, I'm very curious to understand how has this global health crisis shaped and impacted investor appetite and investor optimism? Are you perhaps witnessing several serial startup investors now migrate their money towards, supposedly safer asset classes?
That's a great question because I think finance in whole has been turned on its head because of this lockdown. Typically with every financial crisis, there's usually one location or one particular sector that's the cause of it. A good example was 2008, there was the banking crisis. So with the banking crisis, we knew that, investment banks are the main target here, whereas with this global pandemic, it's been a bit of a concern that there's been no, where not to put your money, where to put your money. And particularly as we speak right now, the finance world is on its head. Because a lot of the things that were traditional investments, such as your gold and your secure bonds and so forth, no one's actually touching them. They're going for more risky assets. So in fact, what you're seeing is companies in the startup space actually being able to raise money now much faster than they did, let's say, 3 months ago when the lockdown and the pandemic started. So particularly early on, investors were scared. No one actually knew what was going on. But as we've seen it, particularly tech companies and tech startups who are able to weather the storm, they don't need big offices, they can be online, they're doing really, really well. And the success of a lot of the tech companies on the stock market has also led to incredible returns then placed back into newer and upcoming companies. So if you asked me this question 3 months ago, I'd say, everything's dead, it's all terrible, the whole world's going to fall apart. Now, anything goes. So good example, a company like Hertz, bankrupt, it's gone up 10 times in the last week. So nothing makes sense. So what I may say now may change in 3 months. So I think that's the best answer I can give you on today.
Sure. And to sort of build on that, the jury is very much still out on how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted startup culture. There are some camps who view it as a blessing. There are others who, of course, view it as a curse. Where are your thoughts?
Well, I think if you're a startup, and no matter where you are in the world, if you've got to have to adapt. I'm going to use the best example that I could probably think of right now, and I'll use a San Francisco company, your scooters. So before this pandemic happened, anything in the scooter space was big, it was hot, everyone was joining on. Now they've got a problem about, is it clean? Can they get these things out? What are they going to do when, one person uses a scooter and then someone else uses a scooter? So if you're at a startup in that instance, your whole business is now scratching your head, as opposed to a startup where your Uber Eats, food delivery type of company, and guess what? You've never had a better business in the last 3 months. So for startups, even though this may be a concern for them and where they're at, this is an opportunity for them to look at a different potential business model for what they're doing. A good example was a friend's company who I've been following, this is, I think, a great story for startups to look at and what they can achieve in this period is a friend's company called Gigwell. They were doing software for events. Now, events are completely off. No one knows when there's, nightclubs, stadium events, music events happening. So they've actually turned their business now into a content management system, which they built already. So a company that's, if you were to look at it now, go, well, they're never going to get any work in the next year, they'll all of a sudden become very successful, changing their business model, but with the stuff they've already built.
Well, let's hone in on your personal journey a bit. You, of course, co-founded Oddup, which is the startup that ranks startups. And then it seems that you were bit by the blockchain bug, essentially, and you made your way over to Alluva. And today, Alluva is touted as the leading analyst marketplace for the cryptocurrency sector. Tell us more.
No, I'm not going to make shame for being obsessed with blockchain and in the crypto space. I've always been involved in it, particularly from my time at Oddup, because I've always been watching these companies, particularly years ago when no one ever gave anyone the time of day for the blockchain space. But Alluva was always a passion project that I wanted to start where I felt that Alluva was the match of where I wanted to see startups go. Good example of is, what Alluva does is effectively get analysts from around the world and data and give a prediction on what the price of cryptocurrencies and crypto projects will be in the future. We've had tremendous success and it's been growing day by day. I guess the flip side of that is ultimately seeing how that new asset class works as we've seen startups. So Alluva has been not just growing, but also helping people understand the cryptocurrency space in general. So when I look back of my time at Oddup and then how Alluva's been, helped me bite that blockchain bug, as you put it, I just see it as the next evolution in the startup space. Whereas previously in startups, it was a company that, started for 10 years, then ended up IPOing, whereas crypto is a startup company, which is effectively having a mini IPO and then moving on to bigger and better things.
Sure. Well, given your current role at Alluva, would be very curious to understand, do you believe that cryptocurrencies are now becoming the preferred method of fundraising for startups that are looking to raise capital?
I don't think it's the preferred yet, but I think it's coming. As more liquidity heads into the market, I feel that will be ultimately where it's headed. Ask me in 3 years for sure, this is where the main axis of fundraising will be as asset prices increase, particularly in startups where you can't invest in a $1 billion company, but you can invest in portions of it. I do think that's where the blockchain space will help startups get funding. Now, that's probably when the total market cap of cryptocurrency is sitting about $2 to $3 trillion. At the moment, it's at about 250 billion. So there's still a fair bit of time to go. For startups, it's still the traditional formats, but then cryptocurrency will work. However, when it comes to startups, it's always good in your early days to get great investors to help you open doors. So I think it's a great measurement, maybe later stage, for companies to look at cryptocurrencies as a way to raise money.
Now, to do a deeper dive on the Alluva platform for a moment, my understanding is it's essentially a destination where thousands of analysts can share their insights and their predictions around the future performance of multiple cryptocurrency assets. But to what extent do these insights essentially help demystify the sector and essentially perhaps even mitigate so much of the unpredictability and the volatility that crypto assets are currently known for?
Well, I think we're one of the steps in many of the ways of getting information. Cryptocurrency is very different in assessing an asset versus startup. We're startup, few shareholders, the players. It's much more easier to get that analysis, and that's my previous time at Oddup. Whereas with cryptocurrency, there's a lot of FOMO, a lot of different voices, and a lot of different social elements that actually affect the price and relevance of a cryptocurrency. And so the reason we put particularly Alluva together as opposed to what we did with Oddup was that it helps reduce the noise and actually can give analysts much more structured information and scores because there's just more inputs coming in. Whereas previously and we look at the stock market as a good example. Everyone's a stock picker, but let's look at the fundamentals, and that's how a stock comes out. Whereas in crypto, there's not many fundamentals. There's a lot of hype, there's a lot of PR, there's a lot of project validation, which helps put that information together for an investor. So that when I come back to where we are with Alluva, it's aiming to reduce the amount of noise to give a positive outcome to get a predicted price. And that's where we've been pushing Alluva and getting all those analysts. And when we look at the platform, it's pushing that noise to get a consensus in the middle. That's where the price is, as opposed to, I think Bitcoin's 100,000, I think Bitcoin's $1, and trying to find the middle of where it actually should be.
For so many of our viewers who may be watching, especially first-time entrepreneurs, a lot of them have succeeded in terms of creating viable products, but building a business model, around those products is, of course, a completely different story. What word of advice would you have? And perhaps you could draw on your own experience from Oddup and Alluva in this context.
It's a great question because previously you could put anything on anything in blockchain and raise a ton of money and then leave. And it was terrible for the business, terrible for the sector. Whereas, you're finding now, particularly in the blockchain space, where, a lot of the here today, gone today companies have gone because they didn't actually have a business model. So looking back as an investor and a founder and people who've built products is blockchain is the technology to get you there. But think about what you're actually producing. And for entrepreneurs that are listening to this, that market is so underutilized. There's so many projects in the blockchain space that are about protocols and the back end around the crypto space. Whereas there's very few projects that are actually delivering a business model. Are you building an Uber Eats on the blockchain and it's going to work in a specific way? So I think for entrepreneurs getting in this space who want to not just build a great successful company, just build a great product and have blockchain as the technology on that. So similar to using a simple WordPress website to put a website together, think of blockchain as your be-all and end-all database, and you're building your product with that technology. And so for entrepreneurs, always go back to, does anyone want to buy my product? Does this serve a need? Same thing as startups. And those are the blockchain startups that will do exceptionally well.
A key component of being a successful entrepreneur is also, keeping a close eye on the competition. How have you done that, in your career as a serial entrepreneur?
I think the lesson I've learned is when I was younger, I really worried about the competition. Especially in the first days of Oddup, and there was so many competitors in the space. Every time I'd get messages from investors going, "Have you seen this?" And it would actually stress me out. And then I realized, don't fight competitors, build a better product. And that was the key lesson I've learned, and that's what's kept on sort of helping me as people have sort of come and gone, against Oddup, and there's been many coming and gone in the time. And now with Alluva, you work on the product to make the product better, so that your customers keep on buying and more customers keep on wanting to use your product, as opposed to what's this person doing, what's that person doing. And in fact, what I've learned is that if we're all innovating and all of us are being successful, it actually builds a better market. So one of the things I used to think about was, oh crap, there's this company, there's that company, there's this company, they're going to take market share. And eventually one does, but it's actually helping awareness of what you're doing and you're in this space and people actually want to use your product. So competitors can actually help you make money by offering your services, which you want to make better than your competitors, as well as helping them as well. So everyone wins. It's a bit like my father taught me this analogy, and it sort of made sense. It's sort of, having the best restaurant in a street of restaurants. It's great, but if you're on the street of restaurants, at least someone will come past if they can't go to the other one. Whereas if you're a restaurant in a single location, you may not actually be able to get anyone there. So it's in the right industry, the right location, and also the right, the competitors actually help you out as opposed to worry about it. Just keep on focusing on building a great product.
Words to live by. And I'd like to switch gears here for just a moment and, take the conversation towards investor due diligence. Now, investor due diligence is complex in any context, but perhaps even more so in the context of the cryptocurrency space. So as you built Alluva, was your intention essentially to position the platform as one that would serve as, a substitute for investor due diligence? Or would it sort of serve as a complementary tool and serve as a double check of sorts for investors looking to enter the cryptocurrency space?
This is a really interesting question because it depends on who's our customer. But generally, we are a complementary tool. An investor will make their decision whichever way they want to. And if a good example, if we're telling people that we think Bitcoin in the next 2 years will be worth 100,000 US dollars, and they say, oh, Alluva's validation that that's what we think, they're going to take our advice. People tend to get drawn to advice that matches their own thesis. So the way we structure it is we're on risk. If we keep on getting it right, then people will continue to use our platform. If we keep on getting it wrong, no one's going to use our product. So the aim for us is to provide that information for investors. If they're unsure, they can use us to go, okay, there's a different view on a product. Whereas if they're sure, we're giving validation to their own thoughts or negative to their own thoughts. So we're always a complementary tool. The investor always decides. We're just giving them more facts that they may not have seen already.
Now, taking the conversation a bit closer to home, the cryptocurrency sector in India has been met with, skepticism and support. And part of the hurdle is so many of the regulatory challenges that surround the space. And also, it's inherently viewed as a very high-risk asset because of the built-in volatility when it comes to pricing. How do you respond to that? And in your view, how can India sort of embrace this sector or come farther up the curve in terms of facilitating its development?
This is a delicate political question, which I'll be as delicate as I can. But if I look at the technology and I look at the sector and how it's forming, I think a lot of the people who are against it are not in the target market that people should be who will use this product. I use the Hong Kong example, whereas young people will use digital banking, whereas the people over the age of 65 would walk in with their passport and go to the bank counter, where there's a very different mindset. No, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just what they're being used to because they've been doing it for 40 years. Whereas if we look also in the Indian market, you'll see that there's a lot of people well absorbed in phone apps, using their phone, using the digital space. Cryptocurrency is the next evolution to what happened with mobile. So particularly in the decentralized finance space, there is so much for people to sort of absorb and use in the country. And so when there's a lot of criticism, it's usually because they don't understand the technology or they're just at a space. That they're just never going to touch it. And that's fine. Let them do what they're doing. However, the youth of India particularly will completely absorb this space and they'll completely get involved in it. So, blockchain and cryptocurrency is just another source of where the youth of the market is heading towards. A good example is the Western Union transfer. So if we just look at cryptocurrency in a basic form, it's about sending money to different places. Now, even if it's a government initiative or it's a PTM type of product, just sending money across the border shouldn't be so hard. So cryptocurrency solves that, and particularly in some communities where they haven't got access to banking, this is just a breath of fresh air. Yes, I totally get where people are, hesitant, they're skeptical. This is early days. Anyone in crypto is just early. You're 1995 of the internet, and Bitcoin is Yahoo at the moment. So we're still very, very early days. But in the future, I remember, and a good example, I remember being at Goldman Sachs and someone said, people are going to use smartphones. And everyone's like, no one's going to use smartphones. They're going to use Blackberries. This is mad. Famous last words. So I'll use the same words in the crypto and blockchain space. This will be exactly the same thing. And people will be like, oh, okay. And it's just normal. So it's just a technology and it's irrelevant of where it's located at. It's just going to take over. So that's the simplest, non-politicalist way I can say that, if that's a word.
Sure. In the midst of this global health crisis, comparatively speaking, the cryptocurrency sector has weathered the storm better than others. Does this come as a surprise? What is the underlying rationale? And do you expect this trend to continue?
Cryptocurrency is only heading one direction. It's heading up. I've been in this space for the last 6 years and I've seen it continually grow up as more adoption comes through. So the key thing for the space is there's going to be more and more adoption. And all of a sudden this health crisis has added fuel to that. i.e., even if you take cryptocurrency out, everyone's using tools from home, everyone's using your Zooms of the world, cloud storage. That's already happening, and that's happening right now. Cryptocurrency is just adding more fuel to that. So if I was to look at where the crisis is, and then potentially it could happen again, or there's a further lockdown, we don't know what the future of that crisis is. But I can tell you that anything in technology, and particularly crypto, will keep on rising. However, we're in the cusp of a very concerning financial event happening, and that's the printing of so many dollars in this space. And that's mean that assets are just going to become cheaper. The US dollar becomes sort of cheaper and cheaper, whereas crypto is becoming more finite. It's a bit like real estate. So that's where I see from a financial perspective, assets like Bitcoin growing in value. I don't think it's ridiculous for me to say in the next 5 to 10 years we'll see Bitcoin at $1 billion. $1 million, not billions, a bit too generous. $1 million US, and that's because there'll be more adoption. And the call comes down to there's 70 million people using the asset at the moment, and the next year or two they'll probably double those amounts. The more people using the assets, the more it grows and the more value it increases.
And any sort of crystal ball gazing in the COVID-19 era has, proven to be outright, pure speculation. But that said, would love your thoughts going forward on how you see the startup sector shaking out. Are we ever going to heal from this crisis?
Crises come and go. I've seen a few of them in my time. So the short answer is anyone who's getting into the tech space, who have lost their job, can get into the tech space. We're going to see an absolute flurry of startups being born in the next 2 to 3 years. And that's purely because people who may have had a job and have lost them, particularly big companies as they scale down, they're going to be looking to create their own business. So the one sector that I see what will grow exponentially over the next 2-3 years is the e-commerce space. Whereas people may not be able to code, but they may be able to get a Shopify account and sell something online. So what you'll see is a lot of startups being built as a delivery-only model. So in fact, I see the startup space growing so fast and more investment coming into the space. So if I'm looking at a crystal ball, and that's not necessarily in the sense of, this is where I want it to go, that's actually where it's going. So in the last 3 or 4 months of this pandemic, I think it's accelerated tech 2 or 3 years. So we're just increasing this much further. And you'll see on every stock market in the world in the next 10 years, out of the top 50, maybe the top 40 of them being a tech company. So in this area, companies that you may discover could be the next Ubers, Airbnbs, Paytms of the world.
Well, James, thank you so much for sharing those insights and for your optimism. We look forward to reconnecting with you soon.
Thank you.